Welcome to Healthy Kidneys After 60, where we explore the quiet realities of aging and the choices that define our later years. I am Jane Pauley, and tonight we are touching on a subject that keeps many of us awake at night, the fear of losing our memories, our stories, and essentially ourselves. We are honored to have Dr. Sanjay Gupta with us, a neurosurgeon who has spent 5 decades peering into the mysteries of the human brain. Doctor, thank you for joining us in this quiet space.
It is a privilege to be here, Jane. After seeing more than 20,000 patients over the years, I have realized that the most precious thing we own is not our health in a general sense, but the specific flickering light of our memories. I am grateful for the chance to talk about how we can keep that light burning bright, even when the world tells us it is bound to dim.
Doctor, I want to start with a feeling that I think many of our listeners share, a sort of quiet, creeping anxiety. We do our best to stay active, we take our walks, we try to eat what the labels tell us is healthy, yet so many of us still feel those moments where a name slips away or a room feels unfamiliar for just a second. It feels like we are fighting an uphill battle against time itself. Why is it that once we cross that threshold of 60, our minds seem to become so much more fragile, almost like a piece of fine china that can crack from the slightest temperature change? Is there something fundamental that shifts inside us that makes the foods we once loved suddenly feel like a threat to who we are?
That is a profound way to put it, Jane, and it resonates with almost every person I sit across from in my clinic. The reality is that the brain undergoes a silent structural transformation as we age. By the time we reach 60, the physiological landscape of our head has changed. One of the most significant shifts is the reduction in cerebral blood flow. It can drop by as much as 15%. Imagine a garden where the irrigation pipes have started to narrow. The soil still gets water, but the pressure is lower and the furthest corners start to dry out. This makes the brain much less resilient to insults that a 40-year-old brain would simply shrug off. Furthermore, we have these specialized systems in the brain designed to clear out toxic proteins. Think of them as the nightly janitorial crew. After 60, that crew starts working shorter shifts. Those proteins, like amyloid beta, begin to linger longer, creating a toxic environment that fosters inflammation. Our blood-brain barrier, which is supposed to be a fortress keeping toxins out, starts to become a bit leaky. This is why a simple spike in blood sugar from a bowl of fruit or a glass of juice, which your body handled easily in your 30s, now acts like a direct inflammatory hit to your neurons.
It sounds as though our internal defenses are lowering, just as the stakes are getting higher, which is quite a frightening thought for those of us trying to do everything right. When you talk about the brain shrinking or the hippocampus being affected, it feels so clinical, yet for us it manifests as forgetting where we parked the car or losing the thread of a story we've told 100 times. Is there a direct link between this physical vulnerability and the specific choices we make at the breakfast table? Is it possible that the very things we've been told are natural and good are actually accelerating this process because our aging brains no longer have the armor to protect themselves from the hidden sugars inside them?
You have touched on the heart of the modern neurological crisis, Jane. We have been conditioned to believe that anything labeled fruit is a free pass to health, but for the aging brain, that is a dangerous oversimplification. In my decades of research, I have looked at countless MRI scans where the hippocampus is visibly smaller in patients who consume high fructose diets, the seat of our memory and our ability to navigate the world. When that sugar enters a 60-year-old system, it triggers a cascade of internal rust called glycation. This process literally caramelizes the proteins in your brain, making them stiff and dysfunctional. This isn't just about a sugar high or weight gain, it is about the structural integrity of your thoughts. I've seen patients who are meticulous about their cholesterol and their heart health, yet they were unknowingly bathing their aging neurons in natural syrups and high-sugar fruits that were triggering chronic neuroinflammation. This inflammation is like a low-grade fire that slowly charcoals the connections between your brain cells. The reason we feel that brain fog or that momentary slip is often because the brain is struggling to find a pathway through that smoke. We are more vulnerable now because our biological buffer is gone. Every choice we make about what we put in our mouths is now a direct vote for either the preservation of our legacy or the acceleration of its decay. It is a sobering reality, but understanding this vulnerability is the first step toward reclaiming our mental clarity.
It is so heart-wrenching to hear from people who have spent their entire lives trying to be disciplined, choosing the salad over the burger and the fruit bowl over the chocolate cake, yet they find themselves standing in their kitchen, wondering why they are holding a car key or failing to remember a neighbor's name. There is a specific kind of betrayal in that, isn't there, doctor? When someone believes they have followed every health rule in the book, yet their mind begins to betray them anyway, it creates a sense of profound confusion and even anger. Could you tell us about those who feel they've done everything right, but might be missing a hidden culprit in their daily routine that is quietly sabotaging their cognitive health despite their best intentions?
You hit on a very tender nerve, Jane, because I see this look of betrayal in my office every single week from patients who feel they've been cheated by their own discipline. I remember vividly a patient of mine, Mary Thompson, a 68-year-old retired school teacher living in a quiet suburb of Ohio, who came to me with her daughter. Mary was the pillar of her community, always active, and she prided herself on avoiding processed sweets and fatty snacks for decades. But she started noticing what she called brain fog, a terrifying sensation where the world felt like it was behind a veil of gauze, and she began forgetting her grandson's weekend schedule. When we sat down and looked at her healthy habits, we found that every single afternoon, as a way to stay hydrated and get her vitamins, she ate a large bowl of fruit cocktail canned in heavy syrup. To Mary, it was just fruit, a gift from nature, but to her 68-year-old brain, it was a biological disaster. The liquid sugar in that syrup was hitting her bloodstream with the force of a tidal wave, causing her insulin levels to spike so violently that her brain eventually just stopped responding to it.
It is almost cruel to think that a bowl of fruit could be the source of such a decline, especially for someone like Mary, who was trying so hard to be healthy. When you say the brain stops responding to insulin, what does that actually look like in the day-to-day life of someone struggling with their memory? And how does that fog eventually turn into something more permanent if it isn't addressed?
It is a slow, agonizing erosion of the self, Jane. In Mary's case, that daily habit was creating what we now call type 3 diabetes, or insulin resistance of the brain. You see, the brain is an energy hog. It uses 20% of the body's fuel, but when you flood it with the wrong kind of sugar, the receptors on your neurons become deaf to insulin. It's as if the brain is surrounded by a sea of glucose, but is literally starving to death because it can no longer pull that energy inside the cells. For Mary, this meant that the parts of her brain responsible for forming new memories, like her grandson's soccer games, were essentially running on empty. She would read a page of a book, and by the time she reached the bottom, the top was gone. She felt like she was losing her mind, but in reality, she was just starving her neurons with a healthy snack. When I explained that the syrup in her fruit cocktail was more dangerous than a candy bar because of how quickly it bypassed her digestion, she broke down in tears. It wasn't aging that was stealing her mind. It was a misunderstanding of what healthy looks like for a senior. This is the tragedy of many people over 60. They are fighting a war with the wrong tools, and their memory is the first casualty of that friendly fire.
That realization must be devastating, yet it also holds a glimmer of hope if the cause is something we can change. If Mary's story is any indication, many of us are walking around with a ticking time bomb in our pantries. How do we begin to differentiate between the fruits that nourish us and the ones that are secretly accelerating this cognitive starvation?
It begins with understanding that not all sugar is created equal, especially when it is stripped of its fiber. Mary thought she was being virtuous, but by choosing the processed, canned version of fruit, she was discarding the very thing, the fiber, that could have protected her brain. When we eat fruit in its whole form, the fiber acts like a slow-release valve, letting the sugar enter the blood in a gentle stream that the aging brain can manage. But when you take that away and replace it with syrup, you are essentially injecting inflammation directly into your memory centers. I told Mary that her brain wasn't broken, it was just overwhelmed. We had to stop the sugar floods to allow her neural pathways to clear. The fog she felt wasn't a permanent fog, it was the smoke from a metabolic fire. Once we changed her afternoon ritual, the veil started to lift, but the lesson remains. Your brain after 60 is a delicate instrument, and the most dangerous things are often the ones we've been told are the most innocent.
We have been told for generations that a glass of orange juice in the morning is the hallmark of a healthy start, a concentrated dose of sunshine and vitamins. It is a staple in almost every breakfast nook across the country, especially for those of us who grew up believing that natural always equals good. But listening to you describe the sugar floods, I'm starting to look at that morning glass of juice with a lot of suspicion. Is it possible that this ritual, which we perform so faithfully to stay well, is actually one of the most aggressive ways we are damaging our brain's ability to stay sharp as we age?
Jane, I often tell my medical students that if you wanted to design a liquid specifically to bypass the body's defenses and hit the brain with maximum inflammatory impact, you would create something very much like modern fruit juice. The problem lies in the concentration. When you sit down and eat an orange, you are occupied by the peeling, the chewing, and the significant amount of fiber that fills your stomach. You might eat one, perhaps two, but to make a single tall glass of juice, you are looking at the sugar of 4 or 5 large oranges, and you are drinking it in less than 2 minutes. For a 70-year-old body, that is a metabolic catastrophe. Without the fiber to slow it down, that fructose travels straight to the liver and then triggers a massive release of insulin that crosses the blood-brain barrier. I have seen research and conducted my own clinical observations showing that consistent heavy juice drinkers actually have faster rates of brain atrophy. Their brains are literally shrinking faster than those who eat the whole fruit.
That is a terrifying image, the idea of our brains physically shrinking because of a morning beverage. It feels so counterintuitive because we think we are getting those essential antioxidants. Are you saying that the benefit of the vitamins is being completely canceled out by the sheer speed and volume of the sugar delivery? And does this apply even to the all-natural, no sugar added juices we pay a premium for at the health food store?
Exactly, Jane. The no sugar added label is one of the most successful marketing deceptions in history when it comes to brain health. It doesn't matter if the sugar was added by a factory or by the fruit itself. Your neurons don't know the difference. When that high concentration of fructose hits the brain, it promotes a process called glycation, where sugar molecules bond to proteins and fats, creating advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. Think of AGEs as a kind of biological gunk that coats your synapses. It makes the transmission of signals between neurons sluggish and unreliable. You might be getting vitamin C, yes, but you are paying for it with the structural integrity of your hippocampus. In my years of practice, I've noticed that people who insist on their daily juice often complain of afternoon slumps and tip-of-the-tongue syndrome, where they know a word but just can't grab it. That is the glycation at work. It is the sound of your brain's engine stuttering because the fuel is too dirty.
If the morning juice is a dirty fuel, then many of us have been running our engines on the wrong grade for decades. It makes me wonder about the long-term cumulative effect. Is there a point where the damage becomes irreversible? Or can the brain actually begin to repair these clogged synapses if we simply put down the glass and pick up the whole fruit instead?
The brain's resilience is remarkable, but it is not infinite. The key is to stop the daily assault before the gunk becomes a permanent scar. Every time you choose the whole fruit over the juice, you are giving your brain a chance to breathe. You are allowing the insulin receptors to regain their sensitivity. I've seen patients who, after just a few months of switching from juice to water or whole berries, report a clarity they haven't felt in years. It's like cleaning a dirty window. Suddenly the world looks sharper. But we have to be honest with ourselves. The pleasure of that sweet, cold drink is a temporary spike that leaves a long-term shadow. For the sake of our memories, for the sake of being able to recognize our loved ones' faces 20 years from Geo, we have to recognize that liquid fruit is not our friend. It is a concentrated dose of aging that we are pouring into our systems, and it is time we treated it with the same caution we would any other harmful substance.
There is another habit that seems so innocent, especially for those of us who like to snack while reading or watching a movie. We reach for those bags of dried apricots, raisins, or dates, thinking they are the smart alternative to candy or chips. They are portable, they are natural, and they feel like a concentrated burst of energy. But as we've been discussing, concentration seems to be the enemy when it comes to the aging brain. Are these dried fruits just healthy-looking candies that are doing more harm than we realize to our mental endurance?
You've captured the essence of the problem, Jane. Dried fruit is essentially nature's candy, but with a much higher price tag for your neurological health. When you remove the water from fruit, you are concentrating the sugar into a tiny, dense package that is incredibly easy to overeat. I think of a patient of mine, Linda Martinez, a 79-year-old woman from California who was a very health-conscious grandmother. Linda had replaced all her sweets with dried mango and raisins, believing she was protecting her heart. However, she started experiencing profound lapses in her ability to follow a simple conversation. She would lose the thread midway through a sentence. When we analyzed her diet, we found she was eating the sugar equivalent of 3 Snickers bars a day, all from natural dried fruit. To make matters worse, many of these snacks contain sulfites to preserve their color, which can interfere with the brain's ability to absorb essential minerals like magnesium, which is crucial for keeping our neurons calm and focused.
It's startling to think that someone like Linda, who was intentionally avoiding candy, ended up consuming the sugar equivalent of multiple candy bars just by snacking on raisins and mango. When you mentioned her losing the thread of a conversation, that strikes a chord of fear in many people. Is that a direct result of the sugar-induced inflammation you mentioned? And why does dried fruit specifically seem to hit the attention centers of the brain so hard?
It hits hard because of the sheer density of the sugar load, Jane. When Linda ate a handful of raisins, her blood sugar didn't just rise, it skyrocketed. This causes the small blood vessels in the brain, the microvasculature, to become inflamed and constricted. Over time, this restricts the flow of oxygen and nutrients to the neurons. Imagine trying to run a marathon while breathing through a straw. That is what Linda was asking her brain to do every time she snacked on those healthy dried fruits. The result is a lack of synaptic plasticity, which is just a fancy way of saying the brain loses its ability to make new connections or hold on to a train of thought. Linda wasn't developing dementia in the traditional sense yet, but she was creating an environment of chronic neural starvation. Her brain was so busy trying to manage the sugar-induced inflammation that it didn't have the resources left to process a conversation.
Hearing Linda's story makes me realize how easily we can fall into these traps. If her healthy snack was actually starving her brain of oxygen and focus, it makes me wonder about the long-term risks. Are we looking at a permanent decline if we don't change these habits, or can the brain's oxygen supply, so to speak, be restored if we move away from these concentrated sugar bombs?
The good news is that the brain is incredibly forgiving if you stop the insult in time. For Linda, the change was dramatic. We replaced her dried snacks with a small handful of raw walnuts and a few fresh berries. Within weeks, her daughter noticed that Linda was back. She was sharper, she could follow the plots of her favorite shows again, and she wasn't getting lost in her own sentences. The inflammation subsided and the blood flow improved. But the warning is clear. For the person over 60, dried fruit is not a snack, it is a metabolic burden. It is too much too fast for a system that needs stability and gentle nourishment. We have to stop thinking of these foods as safe just because they come from a tree. Once they've been dried and concentrated, they become a different animal entirely, one that can slowly and quietly steal the clarity of your golden years if you aren't careful.
It is so easy to get lost in the fear of what we are doing wrong, but your stories of recovery, like Linda's, offer such a powerful sense of hope. It suggests that our brains aren't just on a one-way slide toward decline, but are actually waiting for us to give them the right tools to heal. I want to talk about that turning point. For someone who has spent years eating the wrong things, is there truly a way to reboot the system? No. Is there a specific path where we can actually see the brain start to flourish again simply by making a different choice at the grocery store?
Absolutely, Jane. This is the part of my work that brings me the most joy. Witnessing the awakening of a brain that has been suppressed by poor nutrition. I've seen cases that seem almost miraculous, but they are grounded in very real science. Take, for example, a gentleman I treated who was struggling with significant memory gaps. He was a retired engineer, very precise, but he found he could no longer finish his crossword puzzles, which was his daily ritual. We didn't just tell him what to stop, we told him what to start. We introduced a daily bowl of fresh blueberries, not juice, not dried, but the whole berry. Within 6 to 8 weeks, his wife called me, nearly in tears, saying he had not only finished his crossword, but was starting to remember details of stories they hadn't discussed in years. This isn't magic. Blueberries contain compounds called anthocyanins, which have the unique ability to cross the blood-brain barrier and actually stimulate the birth of new neurons in the hippocampus.
That is incredible. The idea that a simple berry could actually encourage the growth of new brain cells in a senior. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, yet you're saying this is a documented biological reality. When you see a patient come back like that, what is happening on a cellular level? Is the brain just cleaning out the gunk you mentioned earlier, or is it actually building new bridges between those isolated memories?
It's both, Jane, and that's the beauty of it. The anthocyanins in the berries act like a multi-pronged rescue team. First, they act as powerful antioxidants, neutralizing the rust or oxidative stress that ages our cells. Second, they are highly anti-inflammatory, so they cool down the brain, allowing the existing neurons to communicate more efficiently. But most excitingly, they increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Think of BDNF as Miracle-Gro for the brain. It encourages the survival of existing neurons and promotes the growth of new synapses. When my engineer patient started eating those berries, he was essentially fertilizing his mind. Those Harvard studies we often cite aren't just numbers. They represent real people who are regaining their independence. By shifting from a high-sugar fruit to a high-antioxidant, low-sugar fruit like the blueberry, he was moving his brain from a state of decay to a state of repair.
It makes me think of all the people listening who might feel it's too late for them, that the damage is already done. But hearing that the brain can still respond to Miracle-Gro at 70 or 80 is such a gift. Is this resurrection possible for everyone, or does it require a complete overhaul of one's life to see these kinds of results?
It doesn't require a miracle, Jane. It requires consistency and a shift in perspective. It's not about a diet that you go on and off. It's about a new relationship with food where you realize that every bite is either a medicine or a toxin for your neurons. I tell my patients that their brain is like a highly sophisticated computer that has been clogged with dust and overheating. You don't necessarily need a new computer. You just need to clean the vents and give it the right power source. When you provide the brain with the specific nutrients it needs, like the ones found in berries, avocados, or walnuts, you are giving it the permission it needs to heal itself. The transformation I saw in that engineer wasn't an isolated event. I've seen it time and again. The brain wants to work, it wants to remember. We just have to stop getting in its way with the sugars and processed health foods that are suffocating its potential.
Many of us live with a certain amount of normal forgetfulness, or so we tell ourselves. We joke about senior moments and laugh off the fact that we can't remember why we walked into a room. But I suspect there is a point where it stops being funny and starts being a genuine cry for help from our nervous system. How do we tell the difference between the inevitable slowing of age and those specific urgent warning signs that our brain is actually struggling under the weight of a poor diet and rising blood? Sugar?
That is the most critical question any of us can ask, Jane, because the brain often whispers its distress long before it screams. We tend to ignore the whispers. I remember a patient named Robert Jenkins, a 72-year-old man from Florida who was a retired architect. Robert was still very sharp in many ways, but he started noticing a very specific pattern. Every afternoon around 3 p.m., he would experience a profound brain fog. He would find himself staring at his computer screen, unable to process the email he was reading. He also noticed that he was starting to forget the names of people he had met just an hour before. He dismissed it as just getting old, but when we looked closer, he was also having trouble following the plot of a 1-hour television show. These aren't just senior moments, Jane. These are signs that the brain's energy metabolism is failing. Robert's brain was short-circuiting because his blood sugar was fluctuating wildly due to his habit of drinking 2 large glasses of fruit juice a day.
That sounds so familiar to so many of us, that afternoon slump or the frustration of a story that just won't stay in our heads. When you say Robert's brain was short-circuiting, what is actually happening in those moments of fog? Is the brain temporarily shutting down certain functions because it doesn't have the clean energy it needs? And what happens to our long-term memory when these short circuits happen every single day?
Exactly. Think of it like a brownout in a city. There's still some power, but the streetlights are dimming and the elevators aren't working. When Robert's blood sugar spiked and then crashed, his brain was deprived of its primary fuel. The hippocampus, which is the reception desk for new information, is incredibly sensitive to these fluctuations. When the energy drops, the reception desk closes. That's why Robert could remember his childhood, but couldn't remember a conversation from an hour ago. The new information never got checked in because the power was out. Furthermore, high sugar levels prevent the brain from entering the deep restorative sleep it needs to power wash itself of toxins. So not only was Robert failing to make new memories during the day, but his brain was also failing to clean itself at night. It was a double-edged sword that was slowly dulling his intellect.
It's a frightening cycle, not being able to think during the day and not being able to clean the brain at night. For someone like Robert, who thought he was just experiencing the natural passage of time, this must have been a wake-up call. Is there a specific test or a way for someone at home to realize that their fog is actually a dietary emergency rather than just getting older?
I tell people to look for the ripple effect. If your forgetfulness is accompanied by mood swings, irritability when you're hungry, or that specific afternoon exhaustion, your brain is likely struggling with sugar. Another major sign is if you find yourself needing to reread the same paragraph 3 or 4 times to understand it. That's not old age, that's neuroinflammation. For Robert, the turning point was when I told him that his fog was actually his brain crying out for oxygen and stable fuel. Once he cut out the juice and started focusing on stable, fiber-rich foods, the brownouts stopped. He regained his ability to focus for hours at a time. The brain is a high-performance machine, and it will give you warning lights on the dashboard if you're putting the wrong fuel in the tank. The tragedy is that so many people just cover those lights with a smile and a joke about senior moments until the engine finally gives out.
We often travel to tropical places or visit the exotic section of the grocery store and see these beautiful, vibrant fruits like mangoes, pineapples, and papayas. They feel like a luxury, a healthy treat that must be packed with nutrients because they are so colorful and from the earth. We associate them with vitality and sunshine. But as we peel back the layers of what the aging brain can actually handle, do these tropical delights carry a hidden cost that we aren't seeing? Are they perhaps too much of a good thing for someone who is trying to protect their memory after 60?
It's a hard truth to swallow, Jane, but for the senior brain, tropical fruits are often a sugar trap wrapped in a beautiful package. While they do contain vitamins and minerals, the ratio of sugar to fiber is often skewed much higher than in temperate fruits like berries or apples. A single large mango can contain up to 45 grams of sugar. That is nearly the same as a can of soda. For a younger person with a high metabolism and high insulin sensitivity, the body might manage that. But for someone over 60 whose ability to process glucose is naturally declining, that mango is a massive inflammatory hit. I've seen data suggesting that high intake of these high glycemic fruits in seniors is closely linked to a disruption in the creation of spatial memory, the kind of memory that helps you remember where you are and how to get home.
That is a staggering comparison, one mango being nearly equal to a soda. It really changes how you look at a fruit salad. When you mention the disruption of spatial memory, that is one of the most frightening aspects of aging, the fear of getting lost or feeling disoriented. Why do these specific sugars in tropical fruits seem to target that part of our brain? And is it something that happens immediately, or is it the result of years of tropical indulgence?
It's a cumulative effect, Jane, but the impact is very real. High blood sugar levels lead to the production of cytokines, which are inflammatory signaling molecules. These cytokines love to congregate in the hippocampus, which is also the center for spatial navigation. When that area is constantly bathed in inflammation from high sugar fruits, the neurons there become less efficient at communicating. It's like trying to navigate with a GPS that has a bad signal. You might get where you're going, but you'll take a lot of wrong turns and feel confused along the way. I've spoken with many seniors who felt flustered in new environments, and when we looked at their diets, they were often eating large amounts of pineapple or mango as their primary health food. They thought they were doing their bodies a favor, but they were actually making it harder for their brains to map the world around them.
It's a paradoxical situation, eating something so vibrant and full of life, yet having it dim your internal map. If we love these fruits, is there a way to enjoy them without putting our spatial memory at risk? Or is it better to view them as a rare indulgence, like a birthday cake or a holiday dessert, once we reach a certain age?
I advocate for the treat mentality, Jane. You don't have to banish them forever, but you have to respect their power. If you're going to have mango, have a few small slices after a meal that was rich in protein and healthy fats, which will help buffer the sugar spike. Never eat them on an empty stomach and never make them your main source of fruit. The aging brain craves stability. It thrives on the steady, low glycemic energy of berries or a crisp apple with the skin on. When we treat tropical fruits as the rare exotic treats they were meant to be rather than daily staples, we protect our neurons from that sugar-induced fog. It's about being a conscious gatekeeper of your own mind. Your memories and your sense of place in the world are far more precious than the fleeting sweetness of a piece of fruit.
We have spent a lot of time talking about what to avoid, which can feel a bit overwhelming, but I want to pivot to the small, manageable victories. It is often the tiny daily habits that end up saving us in the long run. We don't need to change our entire lives overnight. We just need to start making better micro choices. I've heard you mention that something as simple as a kiwi can be a powerful ally for a brain. That is feeling tired or worn out. How can such a small change make a measurable difference in how someone feels when they wake up in the morning?
That is the beauty of biology, Jane. It responds to the small things. I think of George Wilson, an 85-year-old gentleman from Texas. George was a vibrant man, but he was starting to feel what he called mental exhaustion by mid-morning. He had a habit of eating processed fruit snacks or a sugary granola bar because they were easy to chew and felt light. I suggested a very simple swap. Replace those snacks with one or two fresh kiwis every day. George was skeptical, but kiwi is a nutritional powerhouse for the aging brain. It is incredibly high in vitamin C, even more than oranges, and it has a unique blend of fiber that keeps blood sugar remarkably stable. Within just a few weeks, George noticed that his morning slump had vanished. He felt a sustained level of mental energy that he hadn't experienced in years.
It is so encouraging to hear that something as simple as a kiwi could help an 85-year-old man regain his morning clarity. When you talk about vitamin C and stable blood sugar, how does that actually translate to George feeling more vibrant? Is the vitamin C acting as a shield for his neurons? And does this mean that even at 85, the brain is still capable of being recharged by the right nutrients?
Absolutely, Jane. At 85, George's brain was under a lot of oxidative stress. Essentially, his brain cells were rusting faster than he could repair them. Vitamin C is one of the most potent antioxidants we have. It acts like a rust remover for the brain. By flooding his system with the vitamin C from the kiwi, George was giving his neurons a protective coating. But just as importantly, the stable sugar levels meant his brain was no longer riding a roller coaster of highs and crashes. His focus became steady. He told me he felt like he could see his thoughts more clearly. This is what I mean by a recharge. We aren't just stopping the decline, we are optimizing the function of the cells that are still there. George started spending more time in his garden and even took up a new hobby of birdwatching because he finally had the mental stamina to do so.
It's a beautiful image, someone reclaiming their life and their hobbies because they made a simple change in their fruit bowl. It makes the goal of brain health feel so much more attainable for the rest of us. Is there a compound effect here? If George keeps this up, does his brain continue to get stronger, or is there a ceiling to how much an 85-year-old brain can recover?
The ceiling is much higher than we used to believe, Jane. We used to think that after a certain age, you were just managing the decline. But the more we learn about neuroplasticity, the more we realize that the brain can continue to form new connections as long as it has the right environment. By choosing the kiwi over the processed snack, George was choosing to provide that environment every single day. The compound effect is real. As the inflammation stays low and the antioxidants stay high, the brain becomes more resilient to the stresses of daily life. It's not just about one day of clarity, it's about building a buffer of health that protects you for the years to come. George's story is a testament to the fact that it is never too late to start feeding your brain the respect it deserves. A small fruit can lead to a very big change in the quality of your life.
We have covered so much ground today, and I think our listeners are probably looking for a definitive checklist they can take with them to the store. It can be confusing when you're standing in the produce aisle, surrounded by so many choices. If we could distill all of your decades of experience into a simple guide, what would it look like? If you had to name the 5 brain-saving fruits that every person over 60 should have in their kitchen, and the 5 memory stealers they should be very wary of, how would you break that down? For us?
I love the idea of a clear roadmap, Jane, because clarity is the first step toward action. Let's start with the enemies, the ones that, for an aging brain, act more like toxins than food if eaten regularly. Number 1 is definitely fruit juice of any kind. It is just too much sugar without the fiber. Number 2 is dried fruit like raisins and dates, which are essentially sugar bombs. Number 3 is canned fruit in syrup, like what Mary Thompson was eating. Number 4 is the overripe tropical fruits, especially mangoes and pineapples, which have the highest glycemic impact. And number 5 is fruit-flavored snacks or bars, which often contain no real fruit at all, but use fructose to trick your brain. These 5 are the primary contributors to the brain fog and neuroinflammation that we've been discussing all evening.
That is a very clear avoid list, and it's a bit of a shock to see some natural staples on there. But now for the good news, what are the superstars? What are the 5 fruits that actually work to build that Miracle-Gro effect you mentioned, the ones that help us keep our memories sharp and our minds clear well into our 80s and 90s.
The superstars are the ones that provide a slow, steady stream of energy combined with powerful neuroprotective compounds. Number one, as we've discussed, is the blueberry, specifically the wild variety if you can find them. They are the ultimate brain food. Number two is the avocado. Most people don't think of it as a fruit, but it is, and its healthy fats are essential for the insulation of your neurons. Number three is the apple, but only if you eat the skin, which contains quercetin, a compound that protects your brain cells from oxidative damage. Number four is the kiwi for that massive vitamin C boost and blood sugar stability. And number five is the pomegranate. Recent studies have shown that pomegranates contain a molecule that your gut bacteria can turn into a compound called urolithin A, which helps your brain cells recycle their power plants or mitochondria.
It is fascinating to think that a pomegranate could actually help our brain cells recycle their own energy sources. It feels like we are talking about high-tech maintenance for a biological machine. When someone looks at these two lists, the saints and the sinners of the fruit world, how should they approach the transition? Is it a cold turkey situation, or should they gradually phase out the bad and phase in the good to avoid overwhelming their system?
I always suggest a replacement strategy rather than a deprivation strategy, Jane. If you usually have a glass of juice in the morning, try replacing it with a bowl of berries and a glass of water. If you snack on dried mango, switch to a fresh apple with some almond butter. You aren't losing the sweetness, you're just changing the delivery system. The goal is to lower the overall inflammatory load on your brain. When you start making these 5 brain-saving fruits your staples, you are essentially signing a long-term contract with your own memory. You are giving your hippocampus the tools it needs to keep your story intact. This list isn't just about nutrition, it's about preserving the essence of who you are. Every time you choose a blueberry over a spoonful of syrup, you are casting a vote for a future where you are still the one telling your own stories.
Doctor, as we draw this conversation to a close, I am struck by a thought. Many of us spend our lives taking our brains for granted. It is always there processing, remembering, dreaming, and working tirelessly behind the scenes. We reach 60, 70, and 80, and we only start to notice it when it begins to stumble. But there is something deeply moving about the idea that our brains have been our most faithful servants for 6 decades or more. Is it ever too late to say thank you to our minds by finally giving them the protection and the nourishment they have been waiting for all this time?
Jane, that is a beautiful and poignant way to look at it. I often tell my patients that their brain has been the silent narrator of their entire life's journey. It has carried every I love you, every sunset, every lesson learned, and every face of a grandchild. It has worked 24 hours a day for 60+ years without a single break. When we reach this stage of life, our brain isn't just a body part, it is the archive of our soul. And the truth is, it is never ever too late to begin the work of preservation. The brain is remarkably grateful. Even at 80 or 90, if you stop the sugar-induced assault and start providing the Miracle-Gro nutrients we talked about, the brain will respond. I've seen it in the eyes of my patients when the light comes back on. It's a moment of profound dignity, reclaiming the ability to be the master of your own thoughts.
The archive of our soul, that is an image that will stay with me. It reminds us that we aren't just eating for a number on a scale or a lab result, but to keep the very essence of ourselves alive and vibrant. It's about independence, isn't it? The independence to stay in our homes, to recognize our friends, and to keep participating in the world on our own terms. Do you have a final word of encouragement for someone who is listening today and feeling a bit scared about the fog they've been experiencing?
My message is one of hope, Jane. Don't be paralyzed by the fear of what has already happened. The brain is a masterpiece of resilience. Every day is a new opportunity to change the chemistry of your mind. When you make that choice at the grocery store, when you pick up the berries and leave the juice, you aren't just dieting, you are performing an act of profound self-love. You are telling your brain, I see you, I value what you've done for me, and I'm going to help you stay strong. My 50 years in medicine have taught me that the human spirit is inextricably linked to the health of the mind, and you have more power over that health than you've ever been led to believe. Take it one step at a time, one kiwi at a time, and watch how your world begins to sharpen again. It has been an absolute honor to share this space with you, Jane. Thank you for letting me speak for the millions of brains that are just waiting for a chance to heal.
And thank you, Dr. Gupta, for your wisdom, your compassion, and for giving us a roadmap back to ourselves. It has been an eye-opening journey. To all our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Healthy Kidneys After 60. We hope this conversation helps you cherish and protect the incredible mind that has carried you this far. Your story is far from over, and we want you to be the one who gets to tell it. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our upcoming podcasts where we will continue to dive deep into the health secrets of aging gracefully. Until next time, take care of your health and take care of your memories. Good night.